back to Things I'll Take It From Here. Today we're breaking down the new Superman film, which is James Gunn's reimagining of the Man of Steel that's kicking off the new DC universe. There's drama, there's politics, there's clones, and yes, there is a super dog. And joining me is someone very special, my husband Daniel. I've been trying to get him on the pod for a while, and glad he can join me in this episode. So let's walk through the plot and talk about what hit, what missed, and what we'd rate the film. This film opens with a quick recap of Clark's origin. Krypton is destroyed, his parents send him to Earth, and he's raised by the Kents in Kansas. By the time we meet him, he's already been Superman for about 3 years, working at the Daily Planet with Lois and Jimmy. Honestly, I like this trend of skipping the full origin story. At this point, we know these characters. Just give us a compelling story. Did you like that they skipped the whole origin story and just gave us the world where Superman is already established?
Yes, I found, over the course of the last maybe 60, 70 years, I think the public has kind of figured out who Superman is roughly. I think they did a really great job of establishing in, maybe 5, 6 lines of text who Superman is, where he's been, and which version of the character that you're looking at. From there, you now get to see what kind of small variations they're going to put on the original character. I don't want to get too far into spoilers just yet, but, the elements of the character that are maybe going to deviate from established lore, or, where they're going to follow along traditional paths.
I'm glad you brought up spoilers because, if you haven't seen this, you need to watch that and then come back because this is loaded with spoilers. But to jump on that note, even if you haven't seen it, right, I feel like through cultural osmosis, we know who Superman is. Not to dig at the creators of Superman, but if you ask a third grader to create a superhero, it probably would be Superman. We get it.
I think we'll have a fundamental disagreement on, I guess what you're going with, the basicness of Superman. I'm putting little quotation marks around that.
Oh my god, okay.
I understand that his powers might not be the most original, but his powers are not the most interesting part of his stories. Superman is about his moral character, and I think this movie does a great job of diving right into the heart of that subject. It's not about him as a physical being beating up villains. It's about who he is.
I think you are right that Superman can be layered like that. But also he's a dude with lasered eyes.
Very cool laser eyes.
Okay.
I'm going to go with very cool laser eyes.
So, very early on in the film, I think Gunn hits us with a gut punch. Superman, he's literally the most powerful being on Earth, gets defeated right out of the gate by the hammer of Baravia, which we find out he's not just a mysterious soldier, he's Ultraman, who's a clone of Superman that Lex Luthor created and controls using drones. I actually applaud James Gunn for making that choice. Opening the film with Superman defeated sets the tone immediately. This isn't a power fantasy, it's a world where actions have weight, and the whole opening scene being shot in real snow in Norway adds this gritty, tactile realism that makes everything feel more grounded, and it's not all blue screens and lens flare. This Superman bleeds.
If I can also add, I think something that they carry throughout the entire film is established in that early minute, basically.
Right.
Where they don't focus on the physicality of Superman. It's about his character. You don't watch him get his butt kicked by the hammer. You see the aftermath and the emotional result of him getting his butt kicked.
I agree with you that we don't really see that fight happen. We just see the fallout from that fight.
And I think the entire film is about the fallout of Superman's actions, reactions, and character. Immediately at the start of the film, that's where they pick up. It also humanizes him. He's an immigrant who's come from a different alien planet, but at the end of the day, he thinks of himself as human. And while, yes, he has strength beyond any of us could ever achieve, he's still capable of bleeding. He is still human.
And, I think where things get even messier is 3 weeks before the main events of the movie, Superman stops Baravia, a U.S. ally, from invading Jahanpur?
Jarhanpur.
Oh, Jarhanpur. Sorry, y'all. Don't come for me. He stops them from invading Jarhanpur. Fuck.
Jarhanpur. Just take that audio and put it over every time you want to say it.
I'm keeping this in. I need to be held accountable for my lack of wokeness.
Well, it's a made-up country. You can't. Hopefully, you can't be canceled for mispronouncing a made-up fictional place.
Yeah, but regardless, they are a neighboring country to Baravia, and Superman intervened in this country's dealings. I think that immediately starts to blur the lines between heroism and global politics. Superman isn't just saving people, he's actively interfering with military action on a geopolitical scale. And Lex Luthor jumps right in on that. He warns the US government that if Superman ever acts against national interests again, he has a plan to eliminate him. And it's a major turning point in how Superman is viewed, not just as a hero, but as a potential political liability. And then he starts describing his secret weapon, which is like a team of soldiers, and not just any team, but hyper-lethal operatives specifically engineered and trained to kill Superman. He calls them dangerous and powerful, the kind of force you don't unleash lightly. And then in this chilling moment, Lex gives a subtle nod, and one of those same soldiers he described as basically scary steps forward and turns the light on for his presentation. That moment said everything. These soldiers are built to take down, frankly, a literal god. And he reduces one to flipping a switch like a glorified intern. I think that moment was really significant because it shows he's the one who is the most powerful person in the room, right? Like, he's the one who's in control. And I think that's what James Gunn put that moment in there for.
I think in addition to that, I think it goes to Lex Luthor's character that he has quite literally dehumanized metahumans in this version of the DC universe. And also, mind you, that character, if I'm remembering correctly, that was the character who is the clone of Superman. So in another sense, he is ordering basically Superman around as his, well, for lack of a better word, as his bitch. So I think there's a couple of layers going on there.
Yeah.
He's dehumanizing metahumans as a rule. He's dehumanizing Superman, and he's controlling Superman. And I think it's a big ego trip for his character.
I actually really appreciate that James Gunn leaned into this geopolitical angle. I feel like he was channeling the tensions of our present. There are echoes of Ukraine and Russia and also what's happening in Gaza. This film doesn't name names, but the commentary is definitely there. It reminded me so much of Cold War proxy conflicts. I'm curious what your thoughts, as someone who's a history buff, is on this whole Cold War vibe I think James Gunn was going for. Did that land for you?
I think that really did land with me. Now, whether or not it was originally intended with the comic book creators, I think Superman has taken on this embodiment of America as a global political military force in a person. He is a force of doing the most good or evil, and I think what is ultimately great, at least in my mind, about the character Superman is that early on he was filled with this kind of embodiment of honest American values, the most pure, idealized version of it, perhaps, because there's definitely a lot to say about how, America has perhaps changed over the last 50 or 60 years, but let's just go with the idealized kind of Norman Rockwell America. And I think that's what Superman has come to embody, that he is this person who fights inequality. And that, I think, was actually very much baked into the original character. There are early Superman comics of him, literally Superman, fights the KKK is one of his early comics. Superman punches Hitler. Captain America also did that. But, like Superman helped fight in World War II, helped, defeat Nazism and fascism across the world, and helped to embody American values throughout the world in the kind of fictional DC universe, perhaps in a way that America may not have fully embodied throughout its history, including the Cold War. We'll put that aside and probably pick it up again when we talk about Jarhanpur.
Jarhanpur.
That's what I'm going with, if we're mispronouncing it. Sorry to the fictional people of Jarhampur.
Don't cancel us, please. Yeah. But speaking of geopolitical tension, we have to talk about the interview scene between Lois and Clark. And I love this little Easter egg. The recorder Lois uses has the Lord Tech logo on it. That's the same company funding the Justice Gang, or whatever they're calling themselves, which subtly shows how embedded corporate power is in this world. Now, that interview feels casual on the surface. It's in Lois's apartment. It's not a press conference or a newsroom, but the emotional and political tension underneath is definitely there. She presses Clark about what happened in Baravia and Jarhampur, and she's not attacking him. She's doing her job, which is holding someone accountable for stepping into a war zone. But you can see Clark struggling to hold both identities in that moment. He's trying to respond as both Clark Kent and Superman at once, and we start to see that mask slip. I think what really struck me, though, is that Clark genuinely believes he did the right thing. His actions are still guided by that broken message his parents left him, and I think he really wanted to embody that message, right? He really clung to the idea that he was sent to Earth to protect it and be a force for good and to help. And that's what's so compelling. I think one of the big themes of this movie is that heroism is a choice, not something you're born into. But at this particular point in the story, this Superman still sees heroism as destiny, as a purpose. And even as the world begins to question him, he clings to that belief. Not because he's arrogant, but because it's all he's ever known. So after that intense interview with Lois and Clark and I guess Superman, I think Superman feels already like he's under a microscope. And then that's when Lex Luthor makes his big move. He unleashes that massive kaiju on Metropolis as a diversion. And this is when we get introduced, obviously, to the Justice Gang, which is Hawkgirl, Green Lantern, and Mr. Terrific. As they're handling the chaos of the kaiju, Luthor sneaks into the Fortress of Solitude, and he steals and restores Superman's parents' message, and then takes Krypto. Like, evil.
That was the most evil part of the movie.
I thought we were going to get a John Wick moment. But here's the twist. Luthor broadcasts the full message to the world, and the second half of that audio, Clark has never heard it before. And it turns out his parents didn't just want him to protect Earth, they wanted him to conquer it and rebuild Krypton and take as many wives as he needed. It completely redefines everything he thought his purpose was. And that hit me really hard because I think he always believed he was there to inspire, to do good. And suddenly, the mission that shaped his entire identity has this dark imperialist undercurrent. So I'm curious, what was your reaction to hearing the parents' full message?
I was mad that that was the message they ultimately, went with. Not because I didn't think it was a good story move or a good, kind of story beat. I was mad because I wanted them to be good people and I wanted them to live up to that idealism, and they didn't.
And that's probably how Superman felt.
From my, recollection of how he reacted in the film, I think that's what they were going for, is that he wanted his biological parents to live up to the ideals that he was living, and they didn't. And this gets into that, that pivotal second scene of the duality of Superman when he's sitting down with his father on the porch, eating porridge and, looking at a sunrise or a sunset, I don't recall which, and just, talking about what it means to be your own man.
I think everything that you were saying is right. And I think that's what makes this so devastating. And also, this was personal. Like, Luthor made this attack personal. He wasn't just trying to beat Superman. He wanted to unravel him. This wasn't about brute force. It was about identity, his history, his legacy, even Krypto, gone. Every emotional nerve was targeted. Did that come through for you? Because for me, it felt like Lex was trying to hollow him out, not just defeat him, but dismantle everything he believed he was.
I don't think a character like Lex Luthor, as a entirely self-centered, narcissistic asshole, would accept anything other than Superman not just being physically beaten, because that's possible in this universe. It's clear that Superman could be defeated and potentially killed, and perhaps maybe not easily, but at least it's within reason for Lex Luthor's abilities. He wants Superman to be wiped out. As a character, as a person, he wants to prove that he is ultimately better. And Lex Luthor would accept nothing less than Superman's entire character being disgraced, dismantled, destroyed, and gone.
I think he kind of uses that to flip the public. Immediately, the public flipped on Superman. People go from celebrating Superman to fearing him. What followed that broadcast was a lot of anti-Superman propaganda, and we learned later that for some reason Lex Luthor has monkeys that are bots that are flooding feeds with anti-Superman propaganda, which we know what you were trying to do there, James Gunn.
Absolutely. I see you, and save the Snyderverse.
Stop saying save the Snyderverse.
Save the Snyderverse.
Moving on. I think it's really interesting how he was able to weaponize essentially bots to change the public's opinion on Superman. What really gets me is even after Superman sees how quickly the public turned on him, how quickly the government turned on him, he still for some reason believes in the system and also in doing the right thing. So he obviously ultimately surrenders, like literally walks himself into custody, and I think it's because he still wants to do the right thing, and also he wants to save Krypto. Do you think Gunn was making a bigger point there about how institutions will always prioritize control over truth, maybe? Because that moment really stuck with me. What do you think James Gunn was trying to say there with that plot point?
Yeah, well, so one, I think, the fact that the public turned on Superman quickly, I understand that. If I were looking at a ultimately powerful being and thought he was there to help me, and then all of a sudden learned, beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was a threat to me this whole time, a secret threat.
I would join his harem. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry.
We'll have to.
Someone has.
We'll have to work on that later.
We'll unpack that in couples therapy.
Yeah, I think that the public shifting made sense, and I can understand why Superman, as a more empathetic character, might say, "Let me see the most good in people." I think Superman understands to a fundamental level. Frankly, because he is almost invincible, he can handle people having fear and people perhaps reacting with their fear on a way that a regular person might not be able to.
It's funny you said invincible, because I feel like at this point in the film, I couldn't help but to think about the show Invincible.
James Gunn was sitting in his living room watching Invincible or reading the comic one day, and he just went, "Oh, that's a great idea. Let me just write that one down."
Can you describe to the listeners the connection between Invincible and the plot point of the message Superman's parents left for him?
Sure. So effectively, I think Invincible is a inverse character of Superman from a metatextual perspective. Is that, maybe not Invincible, the younger character, but his father, I always forget his name.
Let's just call him Big Daddy Invincible.
All right, well, anyway, the ambassador of the Viltrumite Empire is effectively, if Krypton didn't get destroyed, and they serve as an imperial power across the universe that, uses their Superman-like strength to subjugate and colonize planets across the Invincible universe, and the main character, Invincible, rejects that, notion and rejects his father in the same way that Superman is rejecting his father.
We'll get to that, but just to get back to where we are in the plot, so Superman has clearly turned himself into custody, and we see Lex throw him into a pocket dimension prison. And inside we see Krypto, Metamorpho, and then one of the darkest moments in the whole movie, Luthor forces Metamorpho to make kryptonite by threatening his infant son. And then, with no hesitation, he kills an innocent man, a man who had one brief interaction with Superman earlier in the film. Did that moment turn the tone for you? Were you expecting things to get this dark in a Superman film? And it's political, frankly.
Yeah, I kind of was. I think that the political atmosphere in America has turned into such a kind of cesspool, and I think James Gunn is very much hyper aware of that perspective. I mean, that we're looking at political leaders who are looking to inflict pain on people because of some kind of deep insecurity. And I think that Lex Luthor is directly modeled off of many of the, let's say, wealthy billionaires who are using their power and influence, social media influence, and otherwise, to inflict pain on others because they're deeply insecure, weak men. There's a couple of people, frankly, that I think he's kind of modeling him after.
I think what really hit for me was who stood by Superman in that moment. The Justice Gang, at first, they didn't want to touch anything with this, right? I think Superman's reputation was tanked, and they didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But Lois Lane and Mr. Terrific says, no, he is still worth saving. And thank God for Mr. Terrific, who honestly becomes the moral core of this whole story. And also, quick sidebar, if you didn't recognize the actor, that's Eddie Guthige.
Cancel her. Cancel her now.
I'm so bad at names, y'all. I'm so bad at names. But if you don't remember him...
Immediate cancellation. The monkeys are there for you.
Oh my God, the monkeys
Save the Snyderverse.
Leave the Snyderverse where it is. But anyway, for those who don't remember him, he played Darwin in X-Men's First Class. He was the mutant whose whole power was adapting to survive, yet for some strange reason, they still killed him. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Eddie said he had a problem with the fact that his character was the only black character in the film, aside from Zoe Kravitz, obviously, to die halfway through the film. And Marvel said they would bring him back, and then they just didn't. I honestly feel that was like a slap in the face to me. I mean, his whole thing was that he couldn't die, and y'all still killed him. And I think seeing Eddie return back into the superhero world as Mr. Terrific, not just as a side character, but a leader with real purpose and depth, felt powerful to me. And like he finally got the role that he was owed. And I'm really curious how you felt about his character throughout the film, because for me, he honestly stole almost every scene he was in. That fight sequence with Lois in the bubble was top tier, and he was calm and completely commanding without ever doing too much. Like, I think Mr. Terrific really lived up to his name.
The action scene that he was in kicked ass.
Yeah, it had that James Gunn flair. And I think that's what James Gunn does really well, is like these fight scenes with like some badass music.
He has a couple of moves. That's one of his moves, and I love that move. Every time it shows up. I think they did it, a couple times in Creature Commandos?
Yeah, Guardians, Scooby-Doo.
My favorite scene in Creature Commandos with the Nazi killing robot. Just everything about it.
He was a really great character in this film, and I'm so glad that him and Lois were able to help Superman escape that pocket dimension. And I think when Superman escaped, Lex totally unravels and he powers up the reactor, and now we're staring down the barrel of a black hole ripping through Metropolis. Meanwhile, the Justice Gang finally gets involved. They arrive just in time to fend off the second Baravian invasion. And here's the kicker, right? Hawkgirl just straight up murders the Baravian dictator and declares, "I'm not Superman," and then drops him to his death. And that moment was cold and powerful. And Gunn is leaning into what makes DC unique. Heroes in DC are flawed. They take real risk and aren't afraid to redefine what quote-unquote good looks like. How did you feel about the Green Lantern character and also Hawkgirl in this movie? And if you didn't know, Green Lantern is actually getting his own show with HBO, and it's apparently going to be a detective show. So I'm curious how you feel about his character. Would you be excited to see him in this show? And how you felt about Hawkgirl when she made that decision to yeet that man from the sky.
That bowl cut is a crime against humanity, but it was hilarious. More so than any of the potential war crimes he committed with his giant middle fingers.
Would you be excited to see this character in a kind of... It seems like the show is going to be some kind of detective series. It's apparently draws inspiration from the show True Detective, if you're familiar with that show at all.
Well, I am, or rather have been, a fan of Nathan Fillion from back with Firefly, in, 2005. So I'm always excited to see more Nathan Fillion in anything, bowl cut or not.
Or bowl cut and all.
Yeah, bowl cut and all. I don't even want them to lose it. At first I was kind of disturbed when I saw the promo pictures with him wearing that bowl cut, and I was like, what are they doing?
I mean, do we have an answer?
No,
I don't think we got an answer.
I think it's, like the giant middle finger. I think he just does not care. I'm not sure if I'm convinced that a true crime kind of story is the best place to show a Green Lantern story.
He'll also be taking another Green Lantern, from what I read briefly, under his wing, and they're going to be solving crimes together.
His character's kind of arrogant, and I think that could play great in a buddy cop story. And I think generally I'm willing to give James Gunn the benefit of the doubt when it comes to, pulling odd story elements and sticking them into, superhero stories. I think he, as a writer, fundamentally understands character. So I'm more than willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'm more than willing to watch.
Yeah, I'm interested too. I'm secretly hoping that the team that made Penguin will somehow be involved with this, but I doubt it. But let's get back to where we are in the plot. So we see the Justice Gang, or whatever they call themselves, teaming up with Metamorpho to help stop this invasion. And that's kind of like the B plot. Jumping back to the A plot, we get the final fight scenes of the film. And Superman is barely holding his own against Ultraman and the Engineer. And honestly, can we talk about the Engineer for a minute? One of my critiques for the film is how underdeveloped her character felt. She says she altered her body, gave up her humanity for Lex. But I don't know, I didn't fully buy it. I feel like Gunn didn't really flesh out her character enough for me, her motivations. I didn't understand what the emotional core was for her in driving some of her choices and decision making. It felt like we were supposed to just accept it because it sounded cool, but for me that part didn't land. What about you? Did that work for you, or did it feel a little thin to you too?
When you point it out, I think I can recognize that. But I also think in a film that has, maybe 10 to 15 major characters in play, you can't win them all when it comes to, deep story progression. So, I look at that and I say, yeah, they definitely didn't put the effort into developing her as a character, and they killed her off, I think, as well. So,
no, I think she survived.
Maybe.
So, I think in the fight scenes, right, I think overall Superman was able to defeat them. I think the Engineer, she passed out, but she was fine. And then we see him also defeat Ultraman. And what we see with him defeat Ultraman is really Ultraman getting sucked up into a black hole, which we didn't see him die. So low-key, he could still be alive. I'm sure he could potentially come back in a future movie, TV show, or something. I think when you don't see the character flat out die, it's because they have an interest in doing something more with the character if given the opportunity.
I think character is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence there. The character of Ultraman was really a blank slate for Lex Luthor's insecurities, frankly. He's literally a pile of muscles that listens to Lex Luthor's commands.
I am so glad you brought that up, because my next point that I was going to talk about is how Lex Luthor controls Ultraman. It seriously felt like we were watching him play a video game. He was barking out commands, and then Ultraman would immediately respond. It was very clinical and jarring, and I think Lex didn't see him as a person at all. Like you said, he saw him as a tool, honestly like a joystick with fists. And I think that leads us into the final battle between Lex and Superman. And it's not just physical, right? It's also psychological. But this time, Superman's grounded. He's not fighting to fulfill some destiny of a Kryptonian directive. He's fighting for his truth. But before we move on, I want to take a moment to actually talk about Lex Luthor's motives for a second. Unlike some one-dimensional villains, Lex Luthor isn't just in it for power, though that's definitely part of it. His plan runs way deeper than that. Let's break it down and talk about what he's really up to. So, one, he weaponizes Ultraman to stage that whole Baravian invasion. And he creates chaos and erodes the public's trust in Superman. And that chaos opens the door for the government to hand Superman over to him under the guise of protecting humanity. And Luthor was supplying them with all of the tools that they needed for this invasion. And in return, he negotiates for control of half the territory. The land is rich in oil and resources, and he had a weird plan to build his own nation fueled by profit and power. Basically, I guess Lex wanted to become a king. And then we also have to talk about Lex's fear of Superman too. Like, he feared Superman's unchecked strength. He thought Superman had no accountability and no allegiance for any government, and thought that's what made Superman dangerous. So he spun this narrative that Superman is a threat and that he is the only one who can neutralize this threat. I mean, it's obviously propaganda, but it works. And I think Lex sees himself not as a villain, but as a savior, like a protector of humanity, as someone that believes that if the world just trusts him enough, he'll secure their future, even if he has to lie, kill, or destabilize half the globe to do it. Do you think Lex had any moral ground? And what did you think about his character overall in this film?
I'll go with that last point first. I thought he was a deeply insecure man-child. He was the embodiment of the manosphere. He was someone who is nothing more than a shell, who thinks himself a fully developed person because he's intelligent. Now, granted, the manosphere isn't particularly intelligent, but he's like if, manosphere became intelligent. If they had, 3 brain cells to rub together. He kind of embodies, I think, a lot of the techno-billionaire perspectives of the current, we'll say, class of people. Those who think that they know better and they can control us. They don't believe in concepts of democracy or freedom. They want a feudal society in which they are in control. So I think he embodies a lot of those perspectives, and it's all fueled by his genuine, deep insecurity. And he cannot accept that Superman is anything other than an alien being that is separate and apart from humanity, when I think the conclusion of the film is that he is ultimately human, and in some ways more human than Lex Luthor is, because he has embodied these, down-to-earth and grounded perspectives. He has ultimate power on a physical level, but his ideals, his perspective, his character is very human.
How did this new take on Superman work for you? And I'm going to go first. For me, I'm giving it a strong 9 out of 10. I think what really worked is how James Gunn didn't just retell the Superman story, he recontextualized it. I know the political angle ruffled some feathers, but to me, it made total sense. Superman has always been a metaphor about duality, power and restraint, alien and human, savior and threat. This version of the story leans harder into the immigrant metaphor than I think we've ever seen for Superman. And I think that really goes back to the creators of Superman and when Superman was created in the 1930s. So I give it a 9 out of 10. What would you give it?
I'm somewhere between 8.5 and 9. The only thing that really took away from it for me was the fact that some of the villains were a little underbaked. Lex Luthor as a character is, interesting, and I mean, I dislike him because he is a frustrating and evil person who, frankly, reminds me of a lot of frustrating and evil people in our real world. But I do think Ultraman and the Engineer are just a little underbaked as characters, as you kind of point out, and so I think that's the only thing that really took away from it for me. I loved the deeply emotional relationship between Clark and his family.
I really liked how the movie ended with Superman back at the fortress, healing and watching those childhood videos. It was such a human moment, especially after all the chaos. And then also Supergirl showing up just drunk, picking up Krypto, and he starts just dragging her around like a rag doll. I just thought that was like a fun little moment, and now we know why Krypto was so unhinged this whole time. Thanks so much for listening to Thanks I'll Take It From Here, the podcast where we break down film, TV, books, and everything in between. Huge shout out to Daniel for coming on and diving into this one with me. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. I will be covering the Fantastic Four reboot next. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Take It From Here Pod for more updates, hot takes, and episode drops. Catch you next time.